There are moments in time that carry a weight beyond what the eyes can see, moments that quietly shape outcomes, redirect paths, and determine whether peace or pressure takes control. These moments do not always arrive with warning signs or loud announcements. They often come subtly, wrapped in ordinary days, hidden within routine, disguised as just another passing date. Yet beneath the surface, something is shifting. Something is aligning. Something is either opening or closing. Before April 11th stands as one of those moments. It is not just another day on the calendar. It is a spiritual checkpoint, a point of decision, a line between what has been allowed and what must now be confronted. Because whether acknowledge exist, and these doors, these spiritual portals do not remain neutral. They either grant access to peace, clarity, and protection, or they allow confusion, heaviness, delay, and resistance to take root. What remains open has influence, and influence, when left unchecked, becomes control. There are patterns that repeat without explanation. Cycles that seem to return no matter how much effort is made to break free. Moments where everything appears fine on the outside, yet something feels unsettled within. These are not always random. They are not always coincidences. Sometimes they are indicators, signals that something unseen has been given access. Access through fear, access through doubt, access through prolonged silence, access through words spoken without awareness, environments tolerated without resistance, or patterns repeated without interruption. Small openings become wide doors when ignored, and what enters through those doors does not always leave on its own. That is why this moment matters. That is why this moment matters. Because before April 11 arrives, there is an opportunity to take control. Not through panic, not through fear, but through authority. A chance to stand consciously, to recognize that what is unseen can still be confronted, and that what has been allowed can be shut down. This is not about reacting to darkness. This is about refusing to give it space. There is a difference between hoping things will change and enforcing that they must. Hope waits. Authority acts. Authority acts. And in moments like this, waiting becomes a risk that cannot be afforded. Spiritual passivity is often the silent doorway that allows problems to remain longer than they should. It is the quiet agreement that permits negativity to settle in, to grow comfortable, to behave as though it belongs, but it does not belong. But it does not belong. It was never meant to stay, and what was never meant to stay must be removed with intention. There is power available. Power that does not rely on physical strength, external validation, or visible evidence. Power that operates through words that carry weight beyond the natural realm. Power that operates through words that carry weight beyond the natural realm. Words that have stood the test of time, that have confronted darkness long before this moment and have never lost their authority. The Psalms. Not as routine readings, not as distant scriptures, but as active declarations, as living words that do not simply inspire, they enforce. They do not just comfort, they correct. They do not merely uplift, they establish boundaries that darkness cannot cross. They correct. Each psalm carries a force that shifts atmospheres, a structure that restores order, a presence that does not negotiate with fear but overrides it completely. Before April 11th, these words become more than optional. They become necessary because time does not pause. Moments do not wait. And what is left unguarded does not remain untouched. This is the moment to become intentional about what is allowed to remain and what must be removed, to recognize that silence is no longer an option where authority is required, to understand that every open door is a decision, either to leave it as it is or to close it with purpose. There is no middle ground in moments like this. It is either openness or closure, access or restriction, influence or authority. And authority must take its place. Because once a door is shut with true authority, it does not easily reopen. Once a boundary is established with intention, it does not easily break. Once alignment is restored, confusion loses its power to remain. This is not about fear of what could happen. This is about control over what will not be allowed to happen. Before April 11th arrives, the decision must be made to stand guarded, aware, and active, to refuse every unseen influence that does not belong, to close every portal that has remained open for too long. Because what is secured now will determine what continues and what finally ends. Not every door is made of wood, and not every entrance can be touched by human hands. Some openings exist beyond the physical, silent, invisible, yet deeply influential. These are spiritual portals, access points through which influence travels, shaping thoughts, emotions, patterns, and outcomes without ever being seen. They do not announce themselves, yet their effects are undeniable. A spiritual portal is not always created in a dramatic moment. It often begins subtly, through repeated patterns that go unnoticed, through environments that are tolerated for too long, through words spoken carelessly, or through emotions that are entertained without resistance. Over time, these small allowances begin to form openings, cracks that slowly widen into doors. And once a door is open, something will eventually pass through it. Influence does not need permission. Where there is no awareness, it settles quietly, builds gradually, and establishes itself in ways that feel almost natural. What once felt unusual begins to feel familiar. What once caused concern becomes something that is simply dealt with. This is how access becomes normalized. Fear that lingers longer than it should, confusion that refuses to clear, delays that seem to repeat without reason, a heaviness that cannot be explained. These are not always random experiences. Sometimes they are evidence of influence, evidence that something has been allowed to remain active behind the scenes. Because every influence requires an entry point. Spiritual portals are often formed through agreement, conscious or unconscious. Agreement with negative thoughts. Agreement with limiting beliefs. Agreement with environments that drain rather than restore. Agreement with patterns that continue simply because they have not been challenged. Even silence can become agreement when action is required. And agreement over time becomes access. But here is the truth that shifts everything. What has been opened can be closed. No portal is permanent when authority is applied. No access point is irreversible when it is confronted with intention. The same way doors are formed through repeated allowance, they are shut through deliberate allowance. They are shut through deliberate resistance. This is where many lose control, not because they lack power, but because they underestimate their authority. They observe patterns, but do not interrupt them. They feel the weight of influence, but do not challenge it. They wait for change instead of enforcing it. But change does not respond to observation. It responds to action. It responds to action. Closing spiritual portals requires more than awareness. It requires activation. A decision to no longer tolerate what has been draining, delaying, or distracting. A refusal to let negativity occupy space that it was never meant to hold. And this is not done through emotion alone. Emotion may recognize the problem, but authority resolves it. Authority is expressed through words that carry weight, words that are aligned with power beyond the natural realm, words that do not beg for change, but command it, words that do not negotiate with darkness, but remove its access entirely. This is where the Psalms become essential. They are not just poetic expressions or comforting passages. They are structured declarations, words designed to establish order, enforce boundaries, and dismantle anything operating outside of alignment. Each psalm carries a specific force, a spiritual authority that confronts what is hidden and restores what has been disrupted. When spoken intentionally, they do more than fill the air. They shift it. They challenge every unauthorized presence. They interrupt every negative pattern. They close every door that was left open through neglect or unawareness, because darkness does not resist passivity. It thrives in it, but it cannot withstand authority when it is consistently applied. Before April 11th, understanding this becomes critical. This is not the time to remain unaware of what is influencing outcomes. This is the time to identify every open door, every repeated cycle, every unexplained resistance, and make a decision to shut it down completely. Not partially, not temporarily, but permanently. But permanently. But permanently. Every environment must be evaluated. Every pattern must be questioned. Every influence must be challenged. Because anything left unchecked will continue to operate. Spiritual control is not about reacting when things go wrong. It is about maintaining authority so that what is wrong cannot remain. It is about recognizing that unseen access points have real effects and refusing to allow them to stay open any longer. Before April 11th arrives, there is an opportunity to shift from passive awareness to active authority, to move from simply noticing patterns to completely dismantling them, to take back control over every space, every thought, every influence. Because once the doors are closed with intention, what once had access will no longer have permission. And what no longer has permission cannot remain. There are words that comfort, and then there are words that command. Words that do not simply bring temporary peace, but establish permanent authority. Psalm 23 stands in that place, not as a gentle suggestion, but as a declaration that resets control, restores order, and removes every trace of lack, fear, and uncertainty. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. This opening line is not passive. It is not a hopeful statement waiting to be fulfilled. It is a decision, a firm alignment that immediately shifts ownership. It declares that guidance is no longer random, provision is no longer uncertain, and direction is no longer left to chance. Where this is established, confusion loses its authority, because a shepherd leads, protects, and sustains. That means there is no room for misdirection, no space for wandering without purpose, no allowance for lack to define the outcome. The moment this declaration is spoken with intention, it closes the door to scarcity and opens the path to divine order. I shall not want. This is not about desire, it is about deficiency. It is a refusal to accept lack in any form. Lack of peace, lack of clarity, lack of direction, lack of provision. It shuts down every narrative that suggests something is missing and replaces it with the certainty that everything required is already secured. And where lack is denied, fear begins to weaken, because fear often feeds on uncertainty. It thrives in the unknown, in the absence or in the space where outcomes feel unstable. But Psalm 23 removes that instability. It replaces it with structure, with assurance, with a confidence that does not depend on circumstances. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. This is alignment. This is restoration. This is the repositioning of a life away from chaos and into peace. It is not earned through struggle. It is established through authority. These words shift the atmosphere from tension to calm, from pressure to rest, from disorder to balance. When declared intentionally, they begin to silence internal noise. They quiet the racing thoughts. They bring stability where there has been restlessness. Because not every battle is external. Many begin within. And once the internal space is restored, the external begins to follow. He restores my soul. Restoration is not partial. It is complete. It addresses what has been drained, what has been weakened, what has been neglected over time. It brings back strength, clarity, and stability. It closes the door to exhaustion that lingers without reason, to heaviness that cannot be explained, to emotional weight that refuses to lift, because what is restored cannot remain broken, and what is strengthened cannot be easily shaken. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is direction with purpose, not random movement, not uncertain steps, but guided alignment. It removes the confusion of what next and replaces it with clarity. It shuts down the portal of misdirection, the subtle influence that causes delays, wrong decisions, and unnecessary detours. Because when direction is established, distraction loses its power. Then comes one of the most powerful declarations: even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. This is where authority becomes unshakable. It does not deny the existence of darkness, but it refuses to submit to it. It acknowledges the presence of challenge, yet completely rejects fear as a response. This is not avoidance. This is dominance. Fear is often the gateway that keeps spiritual portals open. It invites negativity, amplifies problems, and gives influence permission to remain. But this declaration shuts that gateway completely. I will fear no evil, not sometimes, not when convenient, but at all times, because where fear is removed, access is denied. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is not distant protection, it is present authority. It establishes that there is no moment of vulnerability, no second where protection is absent. The rod corrects, the staff guides. Together, they ensure that nothing operates outside of alignment for long. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. This is elevation in the middle of opposition. It does not wait for challenges to disappear. It overrides them. It declares that even in environments where resistance exists, provision and favor remain active. It shuts down the portal of intimidation, the pressure that attempts to create fear, doubt, or retreat. Because where authority is established, opposition cannot dominate. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. This is abundance replacing limitation. It is overflow replacing scarcity. It closes every door that has allowed lack to settle in and establishes a flow that cannot be easily interrupted. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. This is consistency, not temporary relief, but ongoing alignment. It ensures that what has been established does not fade after a moment, but continues daily. And finally, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is permanence. This is stability. This is the closing of every revolving door that allowed cycles to repeat. Before April 11, Psalm 23 becomes more than a reading. It becomes a line drawn, a boundary set, a declaration enforced. Every time it is spoken with intention, it shuts down fear, removes lack, restores order, and establishes control. Because where this authority is activated, no negative influence has permission to remain. There are protections that can be seen, and then there are protections that operate beyond sight. Some dangers do not announce themselves. Some threats do not appear in obvious form. They move silently, work subtly, and attempt to influence outcomes without ever being detected. This is where unseen resistance operates, where pressure builds without explanation, where heaviness arrives without reason, where disturbance enters without warning. Psalm 91 stands as a direct response to this invisible realm. It is not a comforting statement meant only to soothe the mind. It is a shield, a structured declaration of safety, covering, and divine protection that surrounds every dimension of life when spoken with authority and intention. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. This opening establishes position. Dwells is not temporary. It is continuous. It is not occasional. It is consistent. It represents alignment with a place of protection that does not fluctuate with circumstances. And that place is described as a secret place, not hidden from protection, but hidden within it. A space where influence from darkness cannot freely operate. A boundary that is not visible, yet fully active. To abide under the shadow is to exist within covering. A shadow cannot exist without presence, which means protection is not distant. It is immediate, surrounding, and constant. This alone establishes a level of security that is not dependent on human effort, but on divine authority. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him I will trust. This is declaration, not observation. It is not describing what might be true. It is enforcing what is chosen as truth. Refuge represents safety from danger. Fortress represents defense against attack. Together, they form a complete system of protection that shuts down vulnerability. Where refuge is established, exposure ends. Where fortress is established, intrusion is denied. Surely He shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. This speaks directly to hidden traps, situations designed to entangle, delay, or harm without warning. A snare is not obvious until it is triggered. Pestilence is not always visible until it spreads. This psalm declares protection from both what is seen and what is concealed. It shuts down the portal of hidden danger, the influence that works quietly but impacts deeply. He shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall take refuge. This is layered protection, not surface level safety, but deep covering. It implies closeness, consistency, and security that does not depend on awareness of the threat. Even when danger is near, access is denied. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. Truth becomes armor, not emotion, not assumption. Truth. This means deception loses its influence. Lies lose their power. Confusion loses its authority. Because truth does not adjust, it stands firm. Truth is what closes the door to manipulation. It removes the ability of fear-based influence to take root. It replaces uncertainty with stability. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day. This removes timing as a factor of fear. Night and day both represent different forms of attack, some hidden, some visible. But this declaration removes both. It shuts down fear in all conditions, in all environments, at all times. Fear cannot operate where trust is fully activated. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. This is separation, not isolation, but distinction. It establishes a boundary where external instability does not dictate internal security. Even in chaos, protection remains active. It closes the portal of collective fear, the influence that spreads through observation of disorder. Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. This returns again to position. Everything depends on where alignment is placed. Dwelling determines outcome. Connection determines coverage. Alignment determines authority. No evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. This is final protection. It does not negotiate with danger. It denies it access. It establishes a perimeter where unauthorized influence cannot enter. For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. This is active enforcement, not passive observation, but ongoing assignment. Protection is not left unattended. It is assigned, maintained, and enforced. They shall bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Even minor harm is accounted for. Even small disruptions are covered. Nothing is overlooked. Before April 11, Psalm 91 becomes a shield that must be activated daily, not as repetition, but as enforcement. It closes invisible doors. It blocks unseen access. It denies permission to every form of hidden resistance. Because where this psalm is established with authority, nothing unauthorized can remain. There is a point in every spiritual journey where protection is not only needed, but reinforced, where it is not enough to simply close doors once, but to strengthen them continuously. Because influence does not always stop attempting access. Resistance does not always give up after being denied. This is why reinforcement becomes essential, because what is secured must also be maintained. Psalm 121 and Psalm 27 work together in this space. One establishes continuous help and preservation, while the other establishes unwavering confidence and fearlessness. Together, they form a double layer of strength, protection from above, and stability within. Psalm 121 begins with a shift in direction. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From where comes my help? This is not a question of doubt. It is a redirection of focus. It pulls attention away from uncertainty and redirects it toward the source of help. It breaks the cycle of looking inward for answers and instead recognizes that assistance is not limited by human strength or visible resources. Help is not distant, it is assigned. Help is not occasional. Help is not occasional, it is constant. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. This declaration establishes authority at the highest level. It connects support to creation itself. The one who formed everything is the one who sustains everything. This removes limitation from the concept of help. It is not conditional, not partial, and not unreliable. It is absolute. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. This is stability without interruption. It eliminates the idea of vulnerability during moments of weakness or exhaustion. It declares that protection does not sleep, does not pause, and does not lose awareness. There is no moment when coverage is inactive. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. This continues the theme of constant coverage. Keeper means guardian. Shade means covering presence. Together, they establish a surrounding force that remains active in every direction, seen and unseen. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. This removes timing from threat. It declares that no condition, day or night, can produce harm where protection is active. It closes the portal of environmental influence, where external conditions attempt to create internal instability. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. Preservation is not partial. It is complete. It does not only cover external situations, but reaches inward, stabilizing the soul, the core of identity, thought, and emotion. Where the soul is preserved, influence loses depth. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in. This establishes movement security. Every transition is covered. Every shift is protected. No step is outside of oversight. This closes the portal of uncertainty in movement, decisions, and direction. Psalm 27 then shifts the tone from protection to bold confidence. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? This is not a question seeking an answer. It is a statement removing fear from existence. Light represents clarity. Salvation represents rescue and deliverance. Together, they eliminate darkness and danger simultaneously. Fear cannot survive where clarity and salvation are fully recognized. The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Strength here is not temporary. It is foundational. It is not something added in crisis, but something that sustains life itself. This removes intimidation as a force that can influence decisions or emotions. When the wicked came against me, they stumbled and fell. This is the reversal of opposition. It shows that resistance does not always succeed, that pressure does not always prevail, that attempts to destabilize do not always achieve their purpose. It closes the portal of intimidation, the belief that opposition has lasting authority. One thing I have desired of the Lord, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. This establishes consistency of alignment, not temporary protection, but ongoing dwelling, not occasional connection, but permanent stability. In the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. This is strategic covering, not avoidance of trouble, but protection within it. It does not remove challenges. It ensures they do not gain access. Before April 11th, these two Psalms work as reinforcement. Psalm 121 secures external protection and continuous preservation. Psalm 27 builds internal confidence and eliminates fear. Together, they shut down instability from both directions, outside pressure and inside doubt. What is covered cannot be easily breached. What is established cannot be easily shaken. What is reinforced cannot be easily reopened. And in this alignment, both protection and confidence become permanent positions, not temporary states. There comes a moment when awareness is no longer enough, when understanding is no longer the final step, when simply recognizing patterns, influence, and unseen resistance is not sufficient to create change. That moment demands action, not delayed action, not emotional reaction, but deliberate, consistent, and authoritative action. This is that moment. Before April 11th, there is a narrow window of opportunity, an interval where alignment can be restored, where spiritual authority can be reasserted, and where every open door that should not remain open can be permanently closed. But opportunity without action remains unused, and unused authority leaves space for the same cycles to continue. Time does not wait for hesitation. Patterns do not break themselves. Influence does not withdraw simply because it has been recognized. Everything responds to enforcement, and enforcement begins with decision. The Psalms are not passive words meant only for comfort. Hulsa is baying only for comfort. They are declarations designed for activation. They are structured expressions of authority that must be spoken with intention, consistency, and awareness. When they are treated as routine, they lose their weight in practice. But when they are declared with purpose, they become tools of alignment that reshape internal and external reality. This is why repetition matters, not as empty ritual, but as reinforcement. Every morning becomes an opportunity to reset direction. Every night becomes an opportunity to close spiritual access points. Every declaration becomes a line drawn between what is allowed and what is not. But none of this carries effect without intention. Because authority is not silent. It is expressed. It is spoken. It is enforced through consistency. And where consistency is absent, gaps remain. Those gaps are where influence attempts to return, where old patterns try to reestablish themselves, where what was previously closed attempts to reopen. This is why discipline becomes essential. Not emotional discipline that depends on feeling, but structured discipline that remains steady regardless of circumstance. The decision to speak life consistently. The decision to reinforce protection daily. The decision to no longer allow passivity to define spiritual boundaries. Every psalm previously established now becomes part of a system of enforcement. Psalm 23 to establish order and eliminate lack. Psalm 91 to secure protection and block invisible influence. Psalm 121 to maintain preservation and continuous help. Psalm 27 to reinforce confidence and eliminate fear. Together, they form a complete structure of author, but only when applied, not just acknowledged. Before April 11th, this becomes critical because delay in action is not neutral. It is direction. It allows existing patterns more time to persist. It gives influence more opportunity to reinforce itself. It allows open doors more time to remain accessible. But decisive action reverses that direction. This is the turning point where awareness must become enforcement, where knowledge must become declaration, where understanding must become consistent practice. There must be no partial commitment, no occasional engagement, no inconsistent application. Because partial authority produces partial results, and partial results leave room for the same issues to return. This is a moment for full alignment, to speak without hesitation, to declare without doubt, to enforce without inconsistency, because what is consistently declared cannot remain unstable for long. Every unseen influence depends on lack of resistance. Every open portal depends on neglect. Every repeating cycle depends on absence of authority. The moment authority is consistently applied, those systems begin to weaken, not instantly always, but inevitably. And that is why persistence matters more than intensity. It is not about one powerful moment of declaration. It is about sustained authority over time. A continuous refusal to allow what does not belong to remain active. A consistent closing of every door that attempts to reopen. Before April 11th, this is the assignment. Take full authority over what has been influencing outcomes silently. Refuse every pattern that does not align with peace, order, and clarity. Reinforce every boundary that must remain intact, not through fear of what is happening, but through control over what is allowed to continue. And as this practice becomes consistent, something shifts internally first. Confidence strengthens, awareness sharpens, stability increases, and gradually what once felt uncontrollable begins to fall under authority, because what is governed with consistency cannot remain chaotic. This is the final call, not to observe, not to wait, not to wonder, but to act, to declare the Psalms with intention, to reinforce spiritual boundaries daily, to shut every door that does not belong. Before April 11th arrives, the decision must be made clearly and firmly. No more passive awareness, only active authority. No more open access, only closed boundaries. No more open access, only closed boundaries. No more uncertainty, only established control. Because what is enforced now determines what remains later.